I'm Ilan Zipkin. I'm a senior investment director with Takeda Ventures, which is the strategic corporate venture arm of Takeda Pharmaceuticals. So all we focus on are therapeutic products, small molecules, biologics, but that have a strategic relationship to what Takeda is doing on the R&D side. Before that, I was in institutional venture for a few years, so I've been doing VC for 15 now. And so what I'll talk about are our major transitions, and we've actually heard a great lead-in with the first two panels today on some of the issues that you will be facing as an entrepreneur. And I mentioned yesterday that there will always be twists and turns in the road, and our challenge is to try to see far enough ahead to anticipate them. And so I'll talk about a couple of these situations where these are actual companies that I've been involved with, some of which stayed on the rails and others which did not. So I want to make the comparison between a company's life cycle and life. Okay? You're going to go through similar transitions, and actually I realized after I made this slide that many of you will not have gone through these life transitions yet. And you know, I've gone through all of them except for retirement, and so you'll see what I mean. But there's a lot of the same issues associated with starting something, developing it from what is an immature state to a more mature state, figuring out how to keep it that way, and managing things along the way, and you get some of the same reactions to those processes, right? So when you go through a transition, there can be a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst and teeth gnashing and tears and wailing. And there's also this initial excitement, but then you have to figure out how to do it long term. So just like these life transitions, companies go through transitions, and I think trying to see ahead to transitions that you will all face could be helpful. So the first one, and something that was already touched on earlier today, is going from an academic or a scientific founder in a company to having a more experienced CEO or CSO. And I think the headline point here that I've made is that the idea for the company is not the same thing as carrying it out. And some people are starters, others are finishers. You've all come here with an idea, and perhaps you will be able to carry it out, but the more likely case is you'll need to bring other people into the company. You'll need to have some more experience that helps you along the way to actually execute it. So here are 3 examples of companies that I've been involved with, all of which started with an academic founder and some generally animal model proof of concept data for a preclinical stage therapeutic product. But they took very different paths. In the case of Alvine, we pretty much immediately after funding the Series A hired an experienced CEO, somebody who actually was a first-time CEO, but had a huge amount of pharma and industry and manufacturing experience. The founder then was on the scientific advisory board, and actually the founder stayed on the board of directors also, which I don't advise, but in this case we did hire a CEO. In the second case, the academic founder had a business partner. The business partner was a first-time CEO coming out of a tech transfer office, and saw themselves as a long-term CEO, but once we got a little bit into the company, I think we all realized they needed more expertise. We hired an experienced CEO at that point, again, somebody out of a pharma company with a lot of therapeutic area expertise in that case. And then in the third case, which I've just called Company X to protect the guilty, the PhD founder, it was his brainchild. I mean, literally, this guy wrote it down on a napkin and got financing from us, and we thought this was going to be fantastic. And he stayed the CEO for several years. And the outcomes are very different. And actually, I think this is typical of how a lot of companies end up. Having an experienced CEO right away allowed Alvine to really execute on the original plan. And they've gone through a number of challenges, a number of both manufacturing, clinical, et cetera. They were able to work through those. Zalicus, which was originally Neuromed, found that its original thesis that we had invested on wasn't able to go forward. But the CEO was able to pivot the company and has now become a public company, and actually that guy's out, another guy's in, but it's going. Whereas Company X, I think we realized too late that the person who was the founding CEO there, who was completely invested in that idea, his idea, wasn't able to see that the brick wall was coming, and therefore wasn't very good at communicating that there was a brick wall coming. And so by the time we realized we needed to pivot that company, it was too late. We ran out of cash. So I think that's a situation to be aware of. Another transition that you will hopefully go through, if necessary, is partnering with a bigger company. And we heard yesterday that at any given point in time, the reward that your investors and the management can extract from the company is this ratio of how much value have you created, how much risk have you taken out of the company. And partnering is one mechanism for reducing risk, because you've got another group that has both capital and expertise coming in to help move the program forward, hopefully. But you give up some value for that, right? Because the partner's not doing that for free. So in the case of Alvine, again, the management team took it through a phase 2A trial on their own. Clear proof of concept, great signal, but it wasn't enough to exit on. We weren't going to get the big acquisition at that point. With Neuramed, they took their lead program through a phase 1 study. Pretty good proof of concept, looked like it had good pharmacokinetics in the phase 1. And in both cases, they then partnered at that point. Alvine partnering with AbbVie, and Neuramed at the time partnering with Merck. And but again, very different outcomes, right? So because Alvine had taken it through a phase 2A, but hadn't generated enough value at that point, the partnership allowed them to finance a more expensive phase 2B trial and still realize enough potential upside that it was a win-win. And in fact, we haven't seen whether the data will be successful yet, but keeping our fingers crossed. In the case of Neuramed, they had enough data to get this really big deal from Merck if everything had worked. And when we got that program into Merck, because of formulation issues, because the compound itself didn't behave up to Merck standards, they didn't take it forward. And I think a smaller company would have taken it forward on its own and would have worked through those issues in a way that a bigger company just didn't need to. And so ultimately, Merck dropped the program. It came back to the company, but by that time, it was no longer financeable. So a lot of value created early, but you don't actually get the payoff at the end. One potential point of contention between management teams and their investors is the issue of a pipeline, especially in a therapeutic company anyway. Having multiple programs, we like to think, although our discounted cash flow says otherwise, that multiple programs mitigates the risk, right? If you have 3 shots on goal, one of them will work. And that's usually a management favorable position. We'd like to have more opportunities to win. Whereas what discounted cash flow does support is that capital efficiency around one program can create the most value. And so that's usually what investors will favor. And so I don't know if you can read the caption on the cartoon, but it's important to be on the same page. And you can find out too late that you're not on the same page. So what the caption says is, well, Elaine, it looks as though we're not on the same page when it comes to the fidelity issue. That's not what you want to find out late in the day. So in these examples, we had one company that had a specific molecule. It was identified from a natural product extract, and it was a single program, laser focus. In the second case, we had a platform technology, computational design, multiple potential programs, could have gone anywhere, and did. In fact, got a lot of different partnerships to develop multiple programs. And actually, those partnerships enabled Vitae to survive and is now a public company, where Satori did not. With that single program, there would have been great value out of it, but they weren't able to partner it, ran into some preclinical toxicology issues, and that's it, it's gone. Whereas Vitae did have a pipeline, was able to manage some of that, and in this case, it did mitigate their risk, but only because they had partnered those programs with multiple pharma companies and didn't have to get equity financing to support them, which is important. But nevertheless, they survived. Something you're all probably dealing with right now is the build or buy question. You're always going to be confronted by, do we spend our cash on creating infrastructure and hiring people and having labs versus what can we get done by paying others and being more flexible about where we spend our money in order to outsource whatever we're doing. And so, it's like running a car or running a hybrid vehicle, right? You can rev the engine, use a lot of gasoline, or you can coast and charge your electric. And you have to balance those two things. So in this example, Oxon was a company that had found a new clinical indication for a very low dose of what was an existing drug. Company A had a platform technology, lots of different opportunities. And so this is sort of the opposite outcome from the previous example, where the single product opportunity in this case was able to develop it using a lot of sort of outsourced virtual resources and was able to get FDA approval for their product. The trade-off for that was that they didn't have an internal research base for the pipeline, so all the value was in that one product. The platform company staffed up very quickly and thought, this is going to be great, we'll apply it across multiple programs. But they did that before they really had proof of concept around the lead program. And so ended up spending a lot of capital very quickly and not de-risking things enough to generate value. So there's a trade-off with this, but again, I think balance is the goal. So for all of these, you're going to be approaching these transitions, and we all know that they're coming. So what I'll encourage you to do is keep your eyes open and try to recognize the signs of when are we approaching these transitions, and are we prepared for it? If you're, and especially from the investor side, if you're wondering whether we should make a change in the company, like do we need a new CEO? If you're thinking that and wondering about it, it's too late. You should have done it 6 months ago. So keep asking yourself, have our CEO and CSO done this before? Have they, how did it go before? Are we, dealing with whatever issues we need to? Are we biting off more than we can chew? If we are, maybe we need to partner and offload some of that risk in order to manage it. If that doesn't materialize, what are we going to do? Are we going to be able to reduce our spend in order to keep the doors open for a longer period of time? And so it seems, I think it is challenging. You should be planning now what you're going to be doing 6 to 12 months from now, when you might not really even know what you're going to be doing 6 days or 6 weeks from now. But really what you're doing today, ideally, is something that has been thought about and anticipated months prior. And as I've said before, investors and board of directors hopefully are people who have seen the movie before and can help you with that. So pay attention. Very small differences can make a big change. Darwin found this out, right? A 1 millimeter change in beak length between two different species of finches was life and death. When the environment changed, one species died, the other species lived. In cardiovascular biology, you may think that the distance between S and T on this electrocardiogram is not so different between the top and the bottom, but in fact, that lengthening can lead to sudden cardiovascular death. So keep your eyes open, think about things as much as you can ahead of time, and hopefully we'll have some other good advice from the panel.
Ilan, thank you very much. That was really, really interesting, and we're going to talk about some of those aspects right now. So first of all, though, we'll just do a quick introduction across the panel. And so I spoke yesterday, but for those who weren't here, my name is Jeanne Bolger. I am at J&J Innovation, JJDC, which is the corporate venture group of J&J. I've been there for 2 years, and I've been in business development roles in the industry for about 15 years.
Sure. Hi. Hello, and I'm Lynne Murray. I work in the partnering and strategy group at MedImmune. So MedImmune is the biologics division of AstraZeneca. So with the interest that we have is looking at the preclinical to phase 1 assets focused on large molecules, so antibodies, protein-based therapeutics. Before being in this BD role, I was in research at MedImmune, and prior to that, I was at a startup company. So I've been in the position I think a lot of people in the room have been in. So I've sort of seen both sides. I can't say which one's better publicly. Anyway, and I'm looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Hi, Chris Brown. So I work in GSK's scientific licensing group within the Worldwide Business Development Organization. So I joined the industry as a pharmacologist working at Pfizer's R&D site in Stevenage, Sandwich, sorry, slipped there. I work in Stevenage now. I moved from R&D into business development, working for Pfizer in their global licensing function. Spent some time there, and then more recently moved into GSK's role. So I'm primarily responsible for leading due diligence evaluations on preclinical and clinical opportunities, anything up to registration, and looking at the relative risks and investment opportunities for our strategic objectives.
And I'm Holland. I'm what's called a life cycle leader at Roche, which is described as the CEO of the brand. So we look after everything from discovery activity through to final manufacturing and marketing. And I'm currently in a launch year for a very exciting molecule, so I'm loving that. But prior to that, I spent 9 years in business development. So I used to look after oncology, where I did the Zelbraf deal, then headed up CNS partnering, and finally ran the M&A team in the last few years I was there. Prior to that, my career was mainly in sales and marketing, in diagnostics, biotech, and pharma.
I've only been in pharma for 2.5 years, so more of the small company VC experience.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to start with a couple of questions actually for you, Ilan, just to sort of get the conversation going and talk about some of what you referred to there. And here we've obviously a room full of potential entrepreneurs here who are really looking to start up companies and go into their companies. And I'm just wondering, you know, when you talk about it often being desirable for the founder to step back and not be part of the company. So let's think about situations where they do stay part of the company, okay?
Sure. And I maybe I would characterize it differently. I don't think it's necessarily desirable for the founder to step back. I think it's desirable to recognize when new experience is needed.
Right.
I think founders can be part of the company through its entire life, and ideally should be, right? If you've got somebody who knows the product, knows the technology better than anyone else, you want that person involved. But you also have to recognize that that person may not have the experience to manage a 5-person group, much less a 30 or 300-person group, or bring a product from, you know, a animal model stage through to, you know, GLP toxicology. So there needs to be an appropriate role for the founder as the company goes forward.
So when you've seen that happening successfully in companies, what sort of roles have they adopted, and where has that really worked?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is it depends a little bit on where that person started. So if you have a faculty member, for example, at a university who's the founder, typically a scientific advisory board role is the best way to go, and they can stay in touch with the scientists in the company. They can help make connections to the research community outside the company and really opine on scientific issues. When it's been a younger person who's come in, I think I've seen founders grow into very capable chief scientific officers. This all happens to be scientific founders. When there's a business founder, I've seen people grow into very capable CBO or VP of business development, or simply remain founders and hang around and give good advice and not worry too much about day to day, but be there as the idea person.
That's great. So then talking maybe to the other panel members about this sort of pipeline question, because we come across this all the time, also in terms of, as investors, what is the sort of right investment model? It's a debate that you'll hear among investors all the time. Should we be investing in single asset vehicles, or should we be investing in building pipeline capability, platform companies that can generate broad pipeline? So, but thinking about what that looks like from the partnering side, because then most of the panel members are going to be looking at biotechs from the point of view of partnering. Can you talk maybe, Lynne, about what sort of things you're looking for when you're looking to partner with a biotech company?
Sure. So I think the key thing we're looking for is credibility, right? So it's if we're looking at a single asset, how credible is the science? That very much leads all of our interactions. So we're sort of a conduit, and we bring in the small companies or biotech representatives to present really solidly on the science, very in-depth scientific review that we do. But we're looking for credibility of the molecule, for example, the mechanism, the biology, and also then the credibility of the team. I think that's really important for us. We've had, the two case scenarios, we've had some great science potentially and just not presented very well, so that will get dismissed. Or we've had some great people that just don't have the right opportunity yet, they haven't developed the biology yet, and they're the ones that we're really sort of desperate to hang on to, because then we can help shape some of that biology. So I say we're at this stage more looking at the single assets approach rather than the platform approach. I think there's some interest in platforms. I know from the AstraZeneca side, we're looking at sort of new technologies broadly as a platform, but from the MedImmune side, it's more focused on individual assets, and then to start a relationship and a dialogue around that asset with a view to potentially expanding it. But I think it's sort of one step at a time more for us.
I've seen companies that manage to keep a good platform alive with non-dilutive funding, so you can use grants from foundations or government, or you can do discovery collaborations with FTE funding. So there's ways to keep a good platform alive without it necessarily being a drain on investors, and then that can generate future opportunities. So I think it's I get really sad when I see a company with a fantastic platform made to shut it down just to focus on one asset. It really makes me, I think there's other ways of addressing that problem without giving up.
Yeah, and maybe just add from a GSK point of view, you have to recognise that these are big companies that you're talking to, and so you may talk to a group that's got a therapeutic focus and they're looking specifically at that single asset. So maybe you've got 3 or 4 assets, but one's in inflammation, one's in oncology, one's in cardiovascular, but you might just talk to one group. In which case they're going to focus on the one asset. So that's certainly true within GSK, but we also look at platforms, and they may also be kind of new technologies that help us reduce attrition or help with manufacturing or help with capabilities to get into kind of new science areas, and they may have a more kind of general therapeutic, cross-therapeutic purpose. So part of it is, who are you talking to? And I think that was covered in some of the sessions yesterday, and what is the objective of the discussion?
So actually that is a very important tension, though, and I think on the one hand for investors and indeed for founders and management, the breadth of a pipeline is like a real platform on which to build a business, and a single asset approach, which is ultimately maybe what a partner is looking for, leads to a very binary outcome for the investors and for the management. So it is difficult, this problem, and I think in this room there are probably entrepreneurs that have programs that have potential to be single assets, and I think it's something to think about very carefully, how to build that out into a platform while at the same time finding a way to fund the business. towards collaborations or just towards liquidity.
Another thing I've seen with platform companies is you can be clever about your cost. You can lease equipment. You don't have to buy everything. There's things you can do that keep your costs down and allow you to get into the new technology when it arrives quicker. So you don't necessarily need to have a really expensive base. You can do it through leasing and stuff like that.
Well, actually,
This is also why having a view of what it's going to take to get your lead product all the way to the market is important, because if you've got something where at day one a phase 3 program is just not fundable for a small company, then there's going to be a partnering event. Maybe we should think about what we'll do after that lead program gets partnered, as opposed to an orphan indication or something where a small company could take it all the way to the market, and therefore one product could be enough.
Great thought. So just kind of following on from Sarah's comment there about leasing equipment, and that talking about build versus buy, and how to fund the early stages and building up the technology platform of the company. Where what are the important things to keep inside versus outsource, and also if you are going to outsource, what sort of future considerations do you need to keep in mind when you're making those outsourcing decisions? Any thoughts there?
Sure. So I can make a start. So when it comes around to a decision of what you want to do in-house, I think it's really what's most sensitive. So whereas the novel IP, you wouldn't want to outsource anything that could impact that, obviously. We actually do a lot of outsourcing for some of the routine things. There's a lot of different CROs that offer up a lot of fee-for-service type capabilities. So I don't think we're against outsourcing. It makes a lot of sense to outsource some of the fundamentals where there isn't any value of building that capability, and sometimes those capabilities are incredibly expensive. So I think it does help discussing with, viewing who your future partner might be, and having some of that, informal dialogue around who are your potential preferred outsourcing partners, and really planning to do things mentally how big pharma might do it themselves, so that adds to the credibility of the data you get at the end of it. So.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Lynne, and Ilan picked up on some issues that came up in his case studies there around formulation, around safety findings. These are works that you probably will outsource. You'll find a CMO for CMC or manufacture, or you'll find a CRO for the top studies or DMP case studies and so on. And having the right quality of data and having the right guidance is going to be very helpful, certainly if you get into a partnering discussion, because you will be subject to a certain amount of thorough due diligence, and we're going to want to look and make sure that those studies have been run, or those protocols have been run in a way that we are confident with the outcomes. So yeah, absolutely agree. There's plenty of good CROs, and you'll find, I think, most of the pharma companies happy to talk to you about some of their experiences and give you some guidance on what they'd be looking for as well.
Yeah, and remember that outsourcing is not a commodity, right? You can't. It's not the same from different providers, and you can't just order it from eBay and have it show up on your doorstep. You have to really be careful and pay attention to what your contractors and outsourcing providers are doing, and sometimes it requires spending a month in the snow in Prague to make sure that people are doing things right.
That's great. So timing of partnering, Ilan, you talked about this as well, and just for the panel members here who are on the buy side of the partnering activity, how early will you partner? And for the purpose of this audience who will be contemplating probably seeking some partnerships early on, what are you looking for in a partner at that stage? Like, who's going to do what, and how does that divide up?
I think for Roche we do partnering at all different stages, so it can be a discovery partnership where it's a really exciting target, and then you're driven by the science and the hypothesis, and that's what gets you excited, and then there's going to be a very close partnership where maybe we're doing the chemistry and they're doing the biological experiments. A sweet spot for partnering is often the preclinical to phase 1 area, because that's where there's still an inflection point, so we can still get some value, but there's sufficient proof of concept to get us excited and put serious money on the table. So that's kind of where you probably have the biggest benefit of corporate partnering. But of course there's always late stage partnerships as well, and risk reward and all the rest of it. So I think there's no strict rule, and it's all about, as you said earlier, the science and the credibility, and doing those killer experiments early to have a good molecule that's really proving something is fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely agree, and I think worth noting is that the conversations are likely to start very early. So it may be that you have a very long period of time in which you're touching base, updating on your project plans, on data that's coming through before you can actually get into a negotiation, but you're building a relationship, it's a two-way dialogue. Now sometimes it will be that you can do some very early collaborative work, and you've got some complementary capabilities, and that's great. Other times it might be that your partner wants certain risks to be discharged, there's key hypothesis needs to be tested, and then you come back with the data, and that's the right time to partner.
Yeah, no, I'd agree completely as well. I think it depends on what exactly it is. I think we're very interested, as I said, in the early biology, but fundamentally when somebody approaches us, they have to be the expert in that molecule or that platform or that technology. So there has to be some knowledge exchange, and then it's really there that I think the best collaborations and best partnerships is when there's a nice sharing, open dialogue of both sides getting invested in the partnership. So there'll be some continuity from the partner, and then some initiation in-house to really understand what the opportunity is. And when we're looking at new molecules to in-license, for example, I don't know if there's any that we've in-licensed that we haven't changed when we've done at the preclinical stage, because obviously we have a lot of expertise in how to make drugs, and we're looking to partners that have the expertise in a disease area or the expertise in sort of the preclinical models or the platform. They haven't necessarily taken a molecule right the way through to approval. So there's things that we would want, the secret sauce as it were, and so there has to be significant investment from us as well.
And you need internal champions, so don't just focus on the partnering organisation. You need scientists in the organisation that like you and fall in love with you. So go to scientific conferences and meet the scientists from those companies and get somebody to fall in love with you, and then they will bring partnering on board. You need your champions, because partnering will be involved for a period, but they'll then let go and just do alliance management, and the person who sticks with your program and sticks with you is actually the internal scientist. So you need that person to champion you through what can often be big changes in big companies. So make sure you've got a strong relationship with the science.
Can I actually follow up on that and ask, just because I think this is always a big challenge for companies, how do you get to the, not necessarily the scientist, but how do you get to the decision maker?
Yeah.
Because I mean, being inside a pharma company, I'm not even sure how to get to the decision maker inside Takeda. You can come in through business development, you can come in through the website, you can come in through a scientific conference and somebody who works in that area, but none of those are typically ultimately the person who has to say yes. So how do you get to the person who can say yes?
We used to do discovery visits. So first of all, you meet them at a partnering event, then you invite them to come to Roche and present, and then you take your science team to the company, and then they really fall in love, because you get them in the room and you get them having dinner and you get them spending a day together and walking around the labs and seeing the whites of people's eyes, and by that stage you've got a relationship, and then it's quite hard for any other company to come in because you've got you seduce them. So I think you need to invite them to you and really get close and get friendly. Yeah.
Well, so that's actually very interesting, because I mean Chris was talking about this earlier as well, right? And just so that everybody's clear in the audience, I think what we're talking about here is relationship building before there's any contractual relationship between the parties. Yeah. So how long is that process typically? And I see on the small company biotech end a lot of nervousness about that process, because they sort of feel they're giving up and they're disclosing too much, and they're and really what the scientists in pharma are saying, this is about the science and we want to exchange and get to know each other's perspectives on this science. So how long is that process, and how do you provide comfort to entrepreneurs out there who may engage in that process that somebody's not going to run away with the baby, you know?
Yeah. Well, no one's going to run away with the baby. This is part of our day-to-day business. This is, you know, I think it was mentioned on some of the talks yesterday that, you know, a large percentage of the pipelines of pharma companies will come from external science. We do it all the time. We're not in the business of poaching other people's work, but we need to build relationships. We need to understand the opportunity. And to Ilan's point, we will eventually get to the decision maker, and hopefully all of these funnels, scientific funnel, licensing funnel, you know, whatever, will all end up in that same place. And I think from a biotech perspective, you'll realise when the conversation is heating up. It will be very obvious. You'll be making the site visits. You'll have got the attention of, you know, more than a business development professional. You have a team of scientists. You might have a therapy area lead or a platform technology lead, and then, you know, you'll start to be talking about terms, and then it will need to go through a committee process, and that's where the decision maker actually is. But you've got your champions at that point who are saying, we want to do this, it fits with our strategy, we can make the investment, and we're going to recommend to our committee that they should support that.
Yeah, and I think that sort of going back to the question around how long is that sort of piece of string, right? So if it's an amazing opportunity, that relationship can be successful overnight. You know, it's suddenly great, let's go for it, and there's so much enthusiasm. If we're looking for a particular area and we come across that diamond potentially in the rough, or just sitting there being presented, then it can be very quick. But I think, again, the stronger collaborations or partnerships are when there has been a relationship and you believe in the person or the group of people, or you already have sort of trust in what you're seeing. So.
And that can be a good bit longer,
That
right?
can take a long
2 years.
Yeah.
18 months to 2 years. So, I mean, that's important, I think, for people to appreciate, because that is a long time in the life of a small company that's kind of wondering about how they're going to pay the salaries at the end of the month.
Yeah.
But I think that's an important insight, you know, because you have to start that process early. And we heard yesterday, you know, in terms of using the early part of that process really as a sounding board to help the entrepreneurs be guided as to how to go about their development plan, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just add, I mean, it is a two-way process. You may find that there's actually some preliminary agreements around material transfer or feasibility studies, you know, and that may benefit the biotech company if you're going to get data from, you know, preclinical models that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, for example, that change your confidence. So,
As long as they work.
Yeah.
well, that's a risk. Yeah.
It's good feedback, though. When something doesn't work in the hands of a partner, it's good feedback.
So material transfer agreements are important as a step in that process, if that's something that the prospective partner wants, I guess, to allow experiments to be repeated. So when the contractual relationship is formed, and we're talking again about early stage companies, let's say they're still preclinical, and so you've got a small biotech company on the one hand and big pharma on the other, and you know there's a tension in that relationship. It's a very unequal relationship, and generally that's not a good thing for long-term relationships. So what is the perspective of big pharma in terms of managing that imbalance in a way that, you know, protects the partnership and ensures the success?
We try to put in place an alliance charter, so try and articulate, you know, what we're trying to achieve. If you've got sort of shared goals, that really helps, and what people are bringing to the party. And it's a lot about respect and communication, and I think it's important for the biotech to keep telling their story, because you do tend to get turnover in big pharma, and you need to keep reminding people what your story is, and it can be very quick for it to get lost. You know, people not to understand why we did this deal, and you know what was our thinking. So make sure you're always keeping the lines of communication open and telling your story in the most compelling way, because people will change, and you need to keep selling it.
Yeah. And I think, and that goes back to Sarah's earlier point as well about having internal champions. So they'll often be the ones that will always follow through that partnership. So if it is a new molecule, you know, that they'll want to make sure it's shepherded successfully. At the end of the day, we all want success. So the biotech and the pharma, we're investing money in something that we want to be successful. And so if you have that internal champion that can follow it through, and again, it's the relationship part, it's the trust part, and make sure that it does get, developed appropriately, but using each side's strengths. So if we have significant expertise and capabilities on the manufacturing side that a biotech can't have, then obviously that makes, we're not engulfing, we're not becoming a black hole, it's just actually trying to do what's best for the opportunity.
I think, once we've fallen in love with the science and we've got the chemistry between the two groups, then you've got to get a bit more serious about what you're actually going to work on together. So, when I'm looking at licensing evaluations or collaborations, I'm really encouraging both sides to sit down and work out what the work is going to be, who's bringing what to the table, and and establish the time frames and just get that scope laid out. Our process, probably similar to other companies, will have an alliance manager who will come on board at the point of contracting, will understand the purpose of the agreement, and then as the life cycle of that project moves forward, hopefully there'll be someone from the alliance management function that will provide that kind of more independent oversight. They're not attached to the therapy area necessarily in the same way, but they want to ensure success of the collaboration, and that there may be a similar partner on the other side.
And they'll typically be doing a health check at least once a year on how's the relationship going, getting feedback. So if the partner isn't happy, there'll be feedback loops to say what's not worked, so hopefully you can improve things. So their job is to keep that relationship healthy.
So I'm just going to jump back now then again to the company perspective, and Ilan, this is really a question for you in relation to what you were talking about, transitions, that sort of key transitions when things aren't going right, and so once again thinking about these small companies, I mean at the end of the day these early stage companies are sort of living on the edge all the time, right? So what are the signals really that things aren't going right, and how far off do the milestones have to be for you to know that this is going seriously in the wrong direction, or how much money do you have to have left in the bank to know that it's time to pull the trigger, and who pulls the trigger?
So I think as the question implies, there are so many variables that it becomes company specific. I think you certainly, from the board and investor perspective, you certainly get worried when a company has less than 3 months of cash based on their existing burn rate, right? And you can see the wall coming. But how do you deal with that? It can be very different. I mean, is there a term sheet imminent? Are you trying to hold out for that? Are you trying to get one piece of data that will allow you to then finance? And if that data is negative, then you're going to run out of money because it wasn't fundable anyway. Or can we not do some non-essential activities and sort of keep things extended for a little bit longer? I think the only unifying thing that I would say is that you have to be honest about it. You have to be transparent with your board. You have to be transparent with yourselves. Everyone wants their project to succeed, and everyone involved with your company wants your project to succeed. But you just have to be honest about where is it, what do we need to show, are we moving in the right direction, and you just keep asking yourself that all the time.
And can the same team execute on that turnaround situation, do you feel, and in your experience? Or do the investors typically have to make drastic changes to make it happen?
So I think the same team can pivot, right? If you've got platform technology and you thought it was going to be applied for one use and that's just not happening, but there's another use you could apply it towards, so let's try that. The same team can do that, but it requires leadership that is aware of the fact that it's not working down this path, and doing it early enough that you still have time to make that pivot work. So I think yes, the same team can, more often than not, it requires an outside perspective to, either from the board or a new management, to come in and say, look, this isn't working, let's figure out what will.
So then just maybe last question from me, and then I'll take a few questions from the floor. Talking about exits and the good exits, right? And let's hope that this technology, this company is going to be acquired or enter into a major licensing transaction with a pharma. What does, in the experience of the licensing teams here, what do companies, management teams, and founders typically want at that stage, and what typically happens? Do they come into the company? I suppose that's what I'm trying to get, is there, what's the best way, maybe look at it from two perspectives, the best way from the pharma perspective to deal with the people part of that acquisition, as well as the technology.
I used to run the M&A team, so also got involved in acquisitions, and typically in pharma what happens is you've suddenly got a very exciting hot property, and it's become very competitive, and everything just speeds up and gets very kind of testosterone filled, I guess, or it gets quite aggressive and quite speedy. Typically, one of the things that the team is concerned about is their futures, and are we going to keep the site? Are we not going to keep the site? And how are we going? I think what was important is to be very transparent about that and very clear. And if you're not going to keep the site and you're really doing an acquisition and closing the company down, be transparent about that early on, and have people think through that in their minds and what that means for them. And that can be what they're looking for. It can be fine, but it's important that people aren't sort of surprised by that late in the process. So it's important to be clear what your goals are. And it just gets very competitive and the numbers get very big.
So everybody's happy, basically.
Everyone's happy.
I can't comment specifically on the people side of things, but you can all look at the evidence within the pharma company. Certainly within GSK, we have senior people who have come into the company as part of acquisitions, and there are other examples where people haven't joined. So I guess they've all worked out what's best for them. And the head of business development at GSK came through from an acquisition.
Yeah, and I think the point is it does vary. So I think there's a lot of, as long as there's open dialogue at the beginning around what the expectations are, and it depends if it's a platform company, if you want to keep that company separate so that they can still partner with other people, or whether you actually want to have complete ownership of the platform technology and not share with our peers. It just depends on exactly what that opportunity is.
That's great.